It all started 3 years ago with a frantic phone call to 911.
I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing.
2-year-old Kaylee Anthony had disappeared. Where was she? We've heard a lot of different stories.
Okay, I'm going to cut to your chase right now so you can get rid of all these questions. The Zanny that my daughter described to me is 24 to 25 years old, about 5'7", 125, 130 pounds. She has straight white teeth, long brown hair. On a scale of 1 to 10, she's a 10, supposedly.
The prosecution says Casey planned Kaylee's death and threw her body away so she could live the beautiful life, a life without Kaylee.
Examination of that scene revealed that the body of Kaylee Marie Anthony had been wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket, stuffed into multiple garbage bags, shoved into a laundry bag, and thrown into a littered swamp like she was just another piece of trash.
But the defense says it was all a tragic accident that snowballed out of control. Little Kaylee drowned, and after 36 days, 12 men and women came back with the verdict.
As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
I want to hear from you. Why do you think the jurors voted not guilty? Send me your thoughts on Twitter and Facebook, or give me a call, 877-TEL-HLN. Good evening, I'm Vinnie Politan. Welcome to Prime News. We are live in Orlando, Florida, outside the Orange County Courthouse. And what an amazing trial we witnessed here for the last 2 months. Absolutely amazing. So many big moments. Of course, we're all thinking about the shocking verdict that many of us did not expect. Many of us never thought we would see. We saw George and Cindy Anthony, the grandparents of the victim, the parents of the defendant, up and down off that stand time after time, being cross-examined by both sides. Some people believing, lying at some times, telling the truth at other times, the 911 calls, the videotapes, the interrogations of Casey Anthony, the remains, those pictures, the testimony about the smell of death. So many big moments in this case, but there's only one that could be the biggest moment of the trial, and it happened early on. It didn't come from Linda Drain Burdick's mouth, it didn't come from Jeff Ashton's mouth, and it didn't come from Cheney Mason's mouth. It came from the mouth of Jose Baez, who during his opening statement completely changed the nature of this trial. Took this case, and like I said at the time, turned it upside down. Jose Baez, in his opening statement, the most anticipated part of this trial, the explanation, what really happened to Kaylee Marie Anthony. That was the biggest moment of Florida versus Casey Anthony.
We are what we are because of who brought us into this world and how we were raised. Casey was raised to lie. This child, who at 8 years old, learned to lie immediately. She could be 13 years old, have her father's in her mouth, and then go to school and play with the other kids as if nothing ever happened. Nothing's wrong. That will help you understand why no one knew that her child was dead. That's the most important thing you must keep in the back of your mind, is that sex abuse does things to us. It changes you. Some people are fortunate to some people are fortunate to live with it. Others are not. And in this sad tragedy, it had to happen to Casey. On June 16th, 2008, Casey was home with Kaylee, and so was her father. Early morning hours, the exact time is not known. It could have been early afternoon, early morning. Actually, it was the early morning hours. George Anthony approached Casey and started yelling at her, "Where's Kaylee? Where's Kaylee?" They began to search the house. They couldn't find her. They searched in the bedroom. They searched under the beds, in the closets, in the garage. Then they went outside. This is a mock-up of the Anthony home, where you'll see they both came outside. Casey came around to the left of the house. George went that way towards the pool. They have an above-ground pool with a ladder. And we'll talk about the pool and the ladder in just a moment, but what happened next is, as soon as Casey came around this corner and went back, she saw George Anthony holding Kaylee in his arms. She immediately grabbed Kaylee and began to cry, and cry, and cry. And shortly thereafter, George began to yell at her, "Look what you've done! Your mother will never forgive you, and you will go to jail for child neglect for the rest of your freaking life." Now, most importantly, you're gonna hear evidence that while at this public supermarket, passing out flyers of his missing granddaughter, George Anthony met a younger woman by the name of Crystal Holloway. They became close. They started dating, or they had an affair, whatever you want to call it. He then began going to her house and visiting her. And on one day, before Kaylee's remains were found, her name is Crystal Holloway, and they began to carry on this relationship. This is the woman in the circle looking over at George at Kaylee's memorial is Crystal Holloway. Right around that time, George Anthony sent her this text. Well, he has denied and will deny on this stand that he ever had a relationship with her. But he couldn't get around the guard at the gate where she lives in, because that woman saw him coming and going many times at her home. And Crystal Holloway will tell you that one day they had a conversation, her and George Anthony, and George began to break down and cry. And she asked him, "What happened to Kaylee?" And he said, "It was an accident that snowballed out of control." This is before Kaylee was ever found.
You know, you're wondering, in this case, is such a high-profile case, would Jose Baez have that takeaway line, like about the glove that doesn't fit and you got to quit? There is one from this case, and it was in the opening statement. It was in the closing argument, and it was in quotes from the jurors in this case. An accident that snowballed out of control. The jury bought it. The seeds were planted during that opening statement that Kaylee Marie Anthony drowned in that pool. And it was her father that orchestrated the cover-up of an innocent accident to make it look like first-degree murder. This jury found that argument reasonable, and there's your reasonable doubt. Biggest moment of this trial, early on. Joining me tonight, Meg Strickler, criminal defense attorney here in Orlando, along with Mark Nejame, attorney for Tim Miller and Texas Equisearch, former attorney for George and Cindy Anthony, and one of the most respected attorneys and successful attorneys in Orlando as well. I want to point that out. Drew Finling also joins us, criminal defense attorney in Atlanta. Great to see you, Drew. All right, Meg, ladies first, right, guys? Ladies first. That opening statement, does this now, through what Jose Baez did, putting stuff out there in the opening statement that I believe he had no intention of proving, at the end of the case had no proof of, is that a new tactic that criminal defense attorneys can now use? You get a case, Just throw it out there. Sex abuse. Don't worry if you have proof or not. Come up with an exact story of what happened, and then show a snapshot picture of someone climbing a ladder on a pool so there could be a reasonable inference. Is this a new tactic that other attorneys may pick up on now?
You're scaring me. If that is going to be the way defense attorneys do their trials now, help us all. I mean, that's a scary, scary thought. It did work. I got to say, it did work. And, you know, what can I say on that? But he did also say something throughout the trial. Something isn't right here. Something isn't right here. Something isn't right here. And something really wasn't right there. And instead of thinking about the jurors really listening to what that story is, the drowning, all that, because those thoughts really still don't connect with me, they were really thinking there wasn't enough to prove the state's evidence.
They said these words, accident that snowballed out of control. Jose Baez told them what the accident was, Mark. He told them in opening statement what it was. This is a new... You guys should use this if you got a big case. Just go out there, come up with a scenario. He's biting his lip. You want me to go to Drew first? You want me to go to Drew first, Mark? Let me go to Drew. Let's go to Atlanta and Drew Finley. Drew, is this the new way to raise a reasonable doubt?
You know, Vinnie, one of the reasons I love being on your show is that you're a seasoned trial attorney, so you and I both know this has been going on for time immemorial. But here's what happens. Viewers must understand that an opening statement is your expectation of the evidence as it's going to come out. And it's a good faith expectation. I've seen this happen, and as a young attorney, I did it. And what happened? The seasoned prosecutor jumped up, approached the bench. Your Honor, we need to know if this is a good faith expectation of the evidence that's going to come out. And if it doesn't come out, we're going to ask a mistrial with no double jeopardy and criminals and sanctions as to defense counsel in this case. And that goes both ways for prosecutors as well. So this always happens, but usually a prosecutor or a defense attorney familiar with the evidence will say, whoa, that wasn't anywhere. Approach, hey, judge, remember this moment. Is this going to come out? Remember this, judge. And if not, business needs to be taken care of. But that didn't happen. Not a word was uttered by the prosecutor, and so be it.
Mark DJ, continue biting your lip, because we got more of the most important moments from this incredible trial coming up next.
There's also a difference, sir, of saying it's human decomposition and not human decomposition.
I didn't say anything about not human. I said decomposition. I'm going to clarify that again. I think I've done that very well. You're trying to take this joy of my life away from me, sir, and you can't do it anymore.
Would you like to see your
I'm going to
statement?
answer this to you, sir. The decomposition that I smelled in the trunk of my daughter's car on July 15, 2008 at Johnson's Towing smelled like human decomposition.
Would you
To
like
me, sir, that's what it smelled like to me. And my knowledge of law enforcement and what I saw for 10 years of law enforcement gives me that opportunity to know what that is. I can close my eyes at the moment, sir, and I can smell that again. How dare you, sir, try to tell me that I did something differently than what I did?
How did you know your granddaughter would be found in the woods 6 months later?
In fact, not an evidence move to strike.
I think all of those facts are in evidence, Your Honor.
The fact that he knew is not.
I'm asking
And I
how.
object.
Overruled and answered for.
Sir, you're asking about my line.
A combative George Anthony on the witness stand. Some of these jurors who came out and spoke afterwards saying, you know, they didn't like that, the fact that he was combative. I kind of understood why he was combative, because he was there and he heard Jose Baez called him a child rapist, saying that he was sexually molesting his daughter since she was 8 years old. I'd be combative with someone accusing me of that. Anyhow, got my panelists back with me. Mark Nejame, we're kind of trying to unzip his lip here about Jose Baez. We'll get back to the opening statement real quickly. Throwing these things out there, throwing out these theories, it's like a new way of trying a case. I mean,
It shouldn't be. You've got to have a good faith basis to present any evidence, to make any statements. We've got to presume that they did. However, why were there no expert witnesses, no psychiatrists, anybody like that to confirm that there was a measure of sex abuse?
because they had
Nothing
no
like that.
intention of trying to prove
No
it.
witnesses
And-
listed even. They didn't even
I'm
have
sorry?
any witnesses listed to testify. You know, they were
nothing.
planning.
So that's why we were saying, you know, it's anticipated she's going to take the stand, because Who else, if there's no expert witnesses, there are no independent witnesses there, and he's denied, who else is going to, who else is
Well,
there
that
to
was another
confirm
big
it?
moment in this case. It was the moment when the defendant herself, Casey Anthony, did not take the stand. Take a look.
Mr. Baez, do you intend to present any more live witnesses?
No, sir, we do not.
Will the defendant be testifying?
No, sir.
Ms. Anthony, do you understand, first of all, is it your decision not to testify based upon consultation with your counsel?
Yes, sir.
And that decision is your decision freely and voluntarily?
Yes, sir.
And with that, we get nothing from Casey Anthony, but we did hear from her family. Another big moment in this trial was Cindy Anthony and what she testified to in the defense case when it came to those chloroform searches, or were they chlorophyll searches, on the computer.
Do you recall in March of 2008 you doing any types of searches for any items that might include chloroform?
Yes.
And could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury why you did that?
Well, I started looking at chlorophyll, and I was concerned about my smallest Yorkie. We have 2 Yorkie puppies. And the smallest one was having some issues where she was extremely tired all the time. And both of the dogs would eat the bamboo leaves out in the back. So I started looking up sources from the backyard that could potentially cause her to be more sleepy than it would affect the larger dog. And I started looking up chlorophyll, and then that prompted me to look up chloroform.
Meg, this jury, I mean, that muddies up that whole issue. Chlorophyll, chloroform, I don't know what they're left to think.
Wow, I remember when she was testifying that day. I just ran to my TV and stood and watched her testify and think, oh my gosh, what is she saying?
It worked. It worked. Still ahead, more of the trial's top moments and the Casey Anthony jury. Just who are these men and women who voted not guilty?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the defense, I want to thank you for the sacrifice that you've made in your jury service and coming here and helping us see justice.
Mr. Baez, you may proceed, sir.
May it please the court. Mr. George. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Miss Heisinger.
You may begin your recross.
May it please the court. Ms. Rainbird. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
The defense may call the next witness.
Yes, sir. The defense calls Dr. Timothy Huntington. Please the court. Mr. Ashton. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Dr. Huntington.
Good morning.
Does the state recognize the presence of the jury? And does the defense?
Yes, sir, we do.
The defense may call the next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Detective Yuri Melich. Please the court. Ms. Rain. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Detective Melich.
Does the state recognize the presence of the jury? And does the defense?
Yes, sir, we do.
You may proceed, Mr. Baez.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, my colleagues in the prosecution. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I, too, would like to thank you on behalf of the defense for the sacrifices you have made as citizens of the state of Florida. We know that it came at a great sacrifice, and both sides saw how much attention you paid to the presentation of evidence in this case. And it hasn't gone lost on us. We all have recognized that. And I want to thank you both individually and collectively for that great sacrifice that you've all made.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, Mr. Nijame, Strickler, Mr. Finling. He built a rapport with this jury. This jury loved Jose Baez, Mark. That was a difference maker.
They seem to.
That was a difference maker here.
I was looking at the audience because that's all we could see from the cameras, and you would see him make a joke and didn't see anybody laugh. I thought that was transferring over to the jury. Apparently it didn't.
When he said good morning, they said good morning louder and louder the closer we got to the verdict.
That crescendo was building, and it's apparent that they liked him because, look, the reality of it is they had to operate in good faith. There's a follow-through what we were talking about, and they thought they were going to have an issue with the sex abuse. So they were pounding, they're pounding the podium with it. It didn't come out, and the jury didn't hold them to it. So you got to presume they acted in good faith. They made a switch up during the middle of the trial, decided presumably not to put her on the stand, no evidence, and yet the jury didn't hold it against them.
Drew Finling, they liked Jose.
Listen, I'm going to go back to what we talked about the other day. They liked him. He established a rapport with them. That's part of trying a case. But when you, as the prosecutor did, laughed out loud at him in an important part of the closing argument, when you know your opponent established a rapport, you roll the dice and you may pay the price, which he did.
I think it was a huge, huge difference in this case. Jose Baez was building that rapport during jury selection, every morning, every afternoon, and you started to hear it at the end. I just didn't pick up on it until they said not guilty. Anyhow, just who are these jurors behind this controversial verdict? Well, I don't have their names, but coming up, I'm going to take a closer look at this group of people and what we know about them.
Juror number 1, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
In the appropriate case, if the facts were bad enough, could you, because you thought it was the right thing to do, raise your hand and vote for death?
Yes. Juror number 2, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. Can you consider it, sir?
Consider the death penalty?
Yes, sir.
No.
Juror number 3, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. The most I know about this case is from you reading the charges on Monday.
Juror number 4, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. I just don't like to judge people judge, to be honest.
Juror number 5, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. My son and grandson have both been in trouble for drugs.
Juror number 6, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Did you witness these dogs actually performing any tasks, whether it be recognizing something or finding something?
Yeah, one of the things they did was having them find certain items.
Juror number 7, were these your true and correct verdicts?
I actually thought it had already taken place. There was something in the St. Pete Times that Saturday before that they had cordoned off media places at this courthouse. And I thought, oh, great.
Juror number 8, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
I do have 2 sons that are around the same age, and if they were in the same situation, I would expect a person to use the evidence to make a proper decision.
Juror number 9, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. My nephew just graduated the academy in Sarasota and became a Manatee County deputy sheriff.
Do you have a general opinion about law enforcement?
I'm very pleased to have them protecting us.
Juror number 10, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. My sister at one time was kind of all messed up in her head, and she was involved with a guy, and it was before I moved down here. This guy that she was messed up with, they broke into my parents' home, and they tied up my dad and took money from him.
Juror number 11, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes. If those facts and circumstances indicated to you that death was the proper sentence to be imposed, could you vote to recommend that sentence, sir?
No.
Okay. Why not?
Well, I know that is the law, but it would be something that would be very difficult for me to do.
Juror number 12, were these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Because the fact that you both have daycare career and now a 1-year-old grandchild, do you think that caused any conflict for you in deciding whether or not Ms. Anthony should live or die?
No.
So how about these 12 men and women? Who are these people? Who are they? Well, we found out a little bit about them during jury selection, and we're finding out more about a few of them as they have come out and talked about what they were thinking through this not guilty verdict. My guests are back with me. I wanted to play for you, and this is from Jennifer Ford, juror number 3, who spoke to ABC News. Take a listen to juror number 3, ABC News, talking about answering the question, how does she believe Kaylee died?
How did she die? If you're going to charge someone with murder, don't you have to know how they killed someone or why they might have killed someone or have something where, when, why, how? Those are important questions that were not answered.
That was Jennifer Ford on ABC's Nightline. And here's what she said. And let me throw this out to everyone. She said, if you're going to charge someone with murder, don't you have to know how they killed someone, why they might have killed someone, where, when, why, how? And the answer to all those, at least from where I'm sitting, is no. You don't, right?
Oh, no. Can you
Mark,
say
you don't.
circumstantial?
No, of course not. It's a circumstantial evidence case. Rare is it that there's a witness who observes a murder, and you put it together through piecing together the evidence.
You don't need to know why, for sure, because that's motive, not an element of the crime. Where, you don't need that. When, you don't need that. Why, you don't need that. How, you don't need that.
Well,
you're saying those are important questions. Yes, they're important questions.
But to defend her, she's not a lawyer. We 3 are lawyers. So when we hear those words, we're thinking, you're not thinking of the elements of the crime of first-degree murder. But to defend her, I'm just thinking on her view.
Yeah, exactly.
She was thinking perhaps the dots weren't connected. And when we take those words out of her mouth, we're thinking lawyerly.
Yeah, but they're her words.
But
Vinnie,
we have
go
to,
ahead,
we
Drew.
have,
Go ahead, Drew.
We have to learn. Hold on one second. We have to learn the lessons from this, though. This is done. Jurors should be left alone. They were there. They heard the evidence. Fair trial to the extent that, both sides picked it. It's done. They shouldn't be harassed. They should not be
being harassed.
I'm not saying you are, but the public I'm talking about. People, what we need to do is learn from it. You go in so you don't go ahead and repeat
you've got to get your point across to the jury that you don't need to prove all those things.
Well, here's what the public needs to know. That this was a death-qualified jury. Now, what does that mean? A lot of prosecutors in this country, particularly the Southeast, in order to ensure their better chances of getting conviction, pursue death because they know they can eliminate the left-of-center people that won't convict somebody of death, won't sentence somebody to death. And that's what these 12 people were. These were not only 12 vetted jurors, they were 12 people that said, we will be responsible for dictating that she receive a lethal injection. That's who these 12 people were, and they still found her not guilty. So nobody should second guess, not 1, not 2, but 12 unanimous people who promptly said the evidence wasn't there. Case closed. Leave these people alone, community.
Can I just ask a follow-up question, Drew?
Absolutely.
Where's the reasonable explanation for the circumstances of this case?
Well, here's what happens. When you have a circumstantial evidence case like this is what I try to bring out. Hey, those circumstantial issues
No, that's not my follow-up. My follow-up was, what are the reasonable explanations for these circumstances? Because that's what I would have asked this jury myself.
Well, okay, restate that, because you're getting me confused. Say that again.
What is the reasonable explanation for the circumstances of this case? That's what I would have asked this jury. Because to have a reasonable doubt, you've got to have some sort of reasonable explanation for all these circumstances that I've put in front of you in my case.
Well, I think the reasonable explanations, in addition to what they have, would have been evidence of physical abuse in the past, evidence of verbal abuse in the past, neighbors that saw suspicious activity.
You're not explaining the situation, though. No, that's not. You're not answering the right question. Meg, go ahead, Meg. What is the reasonable explanation for the circumstances of this case?
I'm going to flip your question a little bit.
No, but you're not answering it. So no one will answer it. They'll flip it, they'll divert it, but they won't answer it because there is no reasonable explanation for the circumstances of this case that do not involve Casey Marie Anthony. Correct?
No, what I was going to say is that you're looking at it differently. You're trying to have the jurors explain. Reasonable doubt is just a whole. When you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, it's like a scale of 1 to 10. They didn't prove all the way to a 10.
Every reasonable explanation for these circumstances that I can come to in my head involve Casey Marie Anthony.
Vinnie,
Give me one that doesn't.
This is not complicated. Circumstantial evidence cases require the prosecution to eliminate all reasonable hypotheses of innocence.
Right.
I did not see any. I thought that all roads led to Casey.
That's what I'm saying.
The jury obviously thought that there were some roadblocks there, and they did not think necessarily that all
I want to
roads
know
led
what one
to...
is. I just want one reasonable...
Give you a specific.
Well,
they could just say, you know what, it didn't
yes,
work
they
for me.
do. Give me one that doesn't involve the mother of the child who's the last one with him, the mother of child with the car in the truck, the mother of child that said nothing but lies about the disappearance of her daughter, which wasn't the disappearance, which was apparently the death of her daughter, that was found a quarter of a mile from her house. Well,
Vinnie,
give me one reasonable explanation that doesn't involve Casey Marie Anthony.
You know, Vinnie, let me address that. And I don't want to, number one, Monday morning quarterback a prosecutor or come up with ways to prosecute cases. But I'll tell you what I was expecting. What I was expecting is, just like Jose Baez clearly disarmed the prosecution by acknowledging she was a liar, I was for certain the prosecutors would anticipate this ultimate problem of not being able to say, hey, here's what happened, here's the cause of death, here's how it took place, and acknowledge that in the opening statement without their far-fetched theories, and say the reason we can't do that is because of the 31-day delay, and do not reward the accused. I would have done that if I were prosecuting from the beginning.
That's fantastic, Drew. You better switch sides and start doing some work for the people.
Never having too much.
There we go. Well, here's my problem is that this jury said that the juror that spoke said, I didn't say she was innocent. So obviously they believed that there were a lot of roads that led to Casey Anthony, right? Is that a reasonable inference I can make from that statement, that they didn't believe she was innocent?
Absolutely.
But all the questions that she had related to this reasonable doubt all involve questions that you don't have to answer. And no one has answered my question.
Because your questions
give me one reasonable explanation involving the circumstances of this case that does not involve Casey Anthony.
Vinnie, your theories are hunches. They're gut, and I'm with you. Listen, the whole nation has a gut feeling on this case, but that's not what our Constitution dictates, and more importantly, that's not the charge the jury did not receive that instruction. They received the law based on the Constitution.
I know. Okay. Great job, Drew. I'm going to recruit you to the DA's office. Don't miss a Nancy Grace special 2-hour event. Nancy Grace has followed this case from the very beginning, from the day that little Kaylee disappeared to the final verdict. Here's a sneak peek at Justice for Kaylee, which airs Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on HLN.
Cindy Anthony, a woman caught in the middle of one of the most horrific stories of our time.
For me, Cindy is the most sympathetic character in the entire proceeding. She behaves in a manner in which I would expect someone to behave who had lost a child.
One of the reasons why everybody is so fascinated with this trial is that it really goes to the heart of family dynamics and mother-daughter relationship.
To me, the most important part of the prosecution case, it was nothing that she said on the witness stand. It was just who she was on that witness stand. The emotional testimony, the shocking verdict. Don't miss this HLN event. Justice for Kaylee, a Nancy Grace special, Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, only right here on HLN. Twitter, Facebook, phone calls. I want to hear from you on today's question of the day. We've been talking about it. Why do you think the jurors voted not guilty? Love to hear from you. 877-TELL-HLN.
As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
Still shocking today. Not guilty verdict for Casey Anthony. She'll be released on the 17th of July. My question of the day to you, folks, is why do you think these jurors voted not guilty? Give me a call, 877-TELL-HLN. Let's go to Chris, who's in Minnesota tonight. Chris, why do you think the jurors voted not guilty? Chris?
Well, a couple of reasons, Vinnie, and I'll go through them real quick. Number one, I think when Cindy called and said the car smells like a dead body, the cops that arrived there never checked it out that night. Then the next time when George called and had with the tow truck driver, and he also said it smells like decomp. You know, why didn't even the tow truck driver call 911? Then they found out that Kronk admitted to moving the skull. And then when Crystal Holloway got up there, she kind of blew away George's credibility when she used the phrase snowballed out of control. To me, that's not a real young person's phrase. I believe also that Casey lied so much before the event that it really didn't affect the jury that she was lying afterwards. And yeah, Vinnie, I do believe she did it, but it would have been hard for me to convict on first or second degree even.
Interesting, Chris, and you make a lot of great points. And some of those things I've heard from the couple of jurors who have spoken so far and the alternate who has spoken. Thanks so much for the call. Here's what the folks are saying on Facebook. Marie says, the jurors, in my opinion, were not understanding circumstantial evidence. And don't we always say in the law, Mark, that circumstantial evidence sometimes can be more compelling, more convincing than direct evidence, because eyewitness testimony is the worst. It's the worst.
That's what people don't realize. Eyewitness testimony has been deemed to be the most unreliable testimony or evidence that you can present. Circumstantial evidence, you piece it together. You use forensics. You use scientific evidence. You put together the pieces of the puzzle. So this misunderstanding that many in the public have, that circumstantial evidence isn't, it's not enough, is not correct. However, there's a lesson here. You've got to better explain to the jury if you're the prosecutor, and if you're the defense, you allow it to stay confused and hazy.
Exactly. That's the line for that. Melanie says, I believe the opening statement of Baez set everything in motion. I agree. And I believe the Anthonys did not help the situation at all. And they're in a tough position. I'm not going to judge them, but their testimony, the way they testified, how many times they testified, made things very confusing in that courtroom. Stella's in Ohio. Stella!
Vinnie. Hi, Vinnie. How you doing?
Good, good. Why do you think the jurors found her not guilty?
Well, I really don't think there was enough evidence against her. There was a lot of maybe, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but no DNA anywhere, nothing. But I do have a question for you.
Uh-oh. Go ahead, Stella.
Well, my question is I will decide if she's guilty or innocent by one thing, and that would be, is she going to go for the remains of her daughter? Whether it's guilty or not guilty?
That's a great point, Stella, because if she had nothing to do with it, that's the final resting place. She could find an opportunity to go there and say goodbye to her daughter and pay respects to her daughter like thousands of other people have. But if she's the one that put her there, she's already been there, doesn't need to necessarily do that. She may have done that with that heart-shaped sticker. Karen says on Facebook, death penalty case. If you're the prosecution, you had to better have a cause of death before proceeding. Do I think she's guilty as days long? Absolutely, but I also have watched this for 3 years. Don't blame them. I feel they did their job and they had to go on. On Twitter tonight, Daryl tweets, they just didn't want to take the time and think it through. Not saying same verdict, but think it through. Danny tweets, it was a holiday. They were overwhelmed, maybe confused, religious, no judgment to others, no experience, maybe afraid, not united. Ron tweets, they didn't understand the jury instructions and focused on things they should not have, unproven molestation accusations. Andy tweets, there was not evidence. Not enough, maybe. If Kronk reported the body when he first found it, she would have been found guilty. I think this case could have been lost too, Meg, by the investigators who didn't go down there August 11, 12, and 13 to find those remains when there was DNA, when there was evidence of what happened to Kaylee.
There's so many things about this case that are not normal in murder investigations, and that's one of them. You call and say, I found a skull, and they don't go down. I mean, I remember when that happened.
It's not like I found a skull, 4,000 miles away. It's a quarter of a mile, the closest wooded area near where they lived. Meg Strickler, Mark Nije, and Drew Finling, thank you all so much. Coming up, more Prime News.
Around 2:15, the Anthonys returned home, just beating a summer storm. That same storm hit a tree next to Kaylee's memorial on Suburban Drive. Blew bits of bark off of it.
Maybe it's just type of sign that somebody else is looking out over this case.
That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe justice wasn't really served right now, but maybe it will be.
Two sheriff's deputies stationed here on Suburban Drive tell me they saw the lightning strike with their own eyes.
How about that, folks? A lightning strike at the site of the remains at the end of this whole case, after it's all over. And I think for all of us, the reason why we were captivated by this case, yes, there was everything else that happened, but I think for us, it ultimately comes down to one thing and one thing only, and that there was this little girl that we were all looking for, that the folks in Orlando were looking for, that was never found. Her remains were found, but the little girl wasn't found. But she can't be forgotten, and I think we never will forget her. That's all for now. Jane Velez Mitchell's up next. I'm Vinnie Politan. Have a fantastic night, fantastic weekend, and don't forget to hug the kids.